Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's session of Imagining Cities of the Future. We're super lucky today to have with us folks from Singapore and in Canada and even Thailand, to share with us a bit of their views around what they are doing, to think about what the city of the future would be like, and also how we are aspiring to work with others, to get there, right? So. Thanks for being here today. My name is Victor, and I'm a Director of Venture Investments here at SGInnovate. So my role is helping to invest in companies that will help to enable, a better tomorrow, right? A quick intro for those who do not know who SGInnovate is. SGInnovate is a private company owned by the Singapore government, and our role is to work on developing the deep tech ecosystem here in Singapore, and as a result, helping to grow the interest and ability, right, in building companies that can solve larger problems. Today, we are super proud to work with the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore to co-present this event on imagining cities of the future. So the URA in Singapore, they're super interested in showcasing Singapore as a living lab for urban solutions, and also to harness AI and data to enable better urban planning and developments. So together, we hope to enable knowledge sharing and collaboration opportunities between startups, corporates, and government agencies in this exciting space. So today's the format of today's event, will be in two sections. The first part, we will have an opening presentation on PLAN.AI, from urban analytics to smart planning assistant, and landing AI for urban planning, which is a presentation that will be done by Chongwen, who is the director of the digital planning lab at the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore. After that, we'll have a panel discussion where I'll bring in a couple of other superheroes here on the screen, to share with you kind of their thoughts and what they've been doing to enable this, right? So I think it'll be a super exciting 1 hour, stay on, and maybe I will pass the mic or the screen over to Chongwen, who can share with us a little bit more around what the URA has been planning and is doing to help Singaporeans achieve this goal. Chongwen, please. Oh, Chong, I think you're still muted, so you need to turn off the mute.
All right. Thank you, Victor. And I think thank you very much for this partnership with SGInnovate for the event this morning, and also the time for all participants to join us in this very exciting topic. Let me get this. So this morning, I will share some perspectives that in Singapore we see in how we look at the next lap of urban planning. And I think when talking about the cities of the future, planning has always been a very important aspect of how do we not just meet the challenges of cities of today, but also meet the needs and challenges of the future, perhaps also unlock new opportunities. So the perspective I will cover includes how do we see at the moment the use of data analytics to inform urban planning decisions and design, as well as how potentially AI could be incorporated in the planning process. So Alvin and I were from the Urban Redevelopment Authority, and we are the Singapore National Land Use Planning Authority with the mission to make Singapore a great city to live, work, and play. As urban planners, like all cities, we have to ensure that there's enough housing, enough amenities, recreation, green spaces for our people. We also got to ensure that the needs of businesses, whether they are in commerce, industry, and also food and agriculture, can be met. But unlike most cities, Singapore as a city and a state, the needs in terms of global connections like our ports and airports, utilities like water, power, and waste, as well as defense needs, are needs that we also need to plan for within the boundaries of the city itself. And that requires us to constantly look at how do we strike a good balance between meeting the needs of the economy, the needs of our people, having a good quality living environment, and optimizing the limited land and sea space that we have. What is changing going forward with climate change, with disruptive technologies, and perhaps many more uncertainties that we may not be able to fully anticipate? It's really the need for us to also be able to incorporate greater flexibility into the plans that we have, and resilience to be able to cope with surprises that may emerge along the way. And I think living through the current COVID period is really a very clear demonstration of the kind of challenges and surprises that sometimes we have to be able to respond to. There have been 3 key thrusts that we've been focusing on in strengthening the way we plan. First, how do we be more data informed and productive in making the good planning decisions that benefits people and businesses, which requires us to be able to harness use of data and have good internal capabilities to be able to make sense of those data to support the decisions involved. Planning also involves a whole system, not just in terms of different stakeholders, but also processes that comes together to allow us to consider things holistically. And this requires the way we plan to be integrated and efficient. And we have been working on how to build up capabilities together with our partners and continuously redesigning the way we do planning in Singapore. Supporting the industry is a very important element, and we're focusing both in terms of how to enable greater productivity through better services, but also how do we provide shared insights and efforts to create value together, perhaps through collaborations as well. I think technology is an important element in today's life. It is not a solution to all problems, but it is definitely a key enabler. Enabler that allows us to boldly imagine the future, be able to identify what are some of these small steps or small solutions we want to achieve, and be able to act on them very quickly. Over the last few years in Singapore, I think we had good progress in how we incorporate the use of data analytics into our planning system, with better insights on understanding the demographic profiles of our towns that allows us to be more targeted and precise in planning for new services and amenities to better meet changing needs. We incorporate understanding of accessibility to various services and amenities that helps us think about how to better optimize placement of new ones and also optimize the distribution with the existing services and facilities itself. With better insights on understanding mobility patterns, whether it's through public transport or other modes, allow us to improve the kind of public transport or transport infrastructure and services, as well as where the destinations that people go to for key services in daily lives, and also a better understanding of where people live and work. That helps us think about how do we bring more jobs closer to home. Earlier, I had a chat with the panel that many years ago, many of these things are what planners rely heavily on surveys, which were done not as frequently and perhaps over a couple of years. Living through this COVID, as I mentioned, I think the reality of the data that is now available allows us to have a much quicker understanding of how things are changing. And certainly, this is an area we'll continue to look at going in the days forward. To harness this data, we also develop new analytics frameworks that allows us to better understand our demand patterns for the different facilities and services, be able to identify where are the gaps, identify and understand how the services are being used to help us think about where should we be siting and placing new services and facilities of the future. As I mentioned, how do we better optimize their placement and distribution? And we also have interest to have ways to better anticipate how these services and facilities will be used. Through our planning system and process, we have been able to integrate quite many of these elements into the process. And one example is our recent master plan, 2019, where we were able to gain a better understanding of how potentially the demographic profiles of our towns are changing. That helps us to right size and right site some of these new facilities going forward to meet these changing needs. Essentially achieve a stronger life cycle planning for our towns to make sure that resources are directed to the right places that improves people's daily lives. Beyond data analytics, we have also developed in-house a suite of digital planning tools. These include tools that allows our planners to better understand the characteristics and profiles of different towns and neighborhoods, be able to better track and monitor the pace of infrastructure development, and also study scenarios in the medium to long term. At the same time, we also develop digital solutions that supports our industry with more self-help services where you get very instantly information on planning approvals, what is allowed or not allowed in different properties. And this enables productivity gains. At the same time, we also have been building up our data science capabilities with academia and industry partners to develop new methods that help us make sense of textual data, as well as other big data like transactional data from mobility services, and also develop new modeling and simulation methods to understand how people commute and how mobility patterns relate to land use. I think as a planning agency, what is really quite unique today, it's also having the in-house team to develop some of digital solutions. A team that is able to translate ideas into tangible solutions within a very short period of time, harnessing the strengths of various enterprise and open source technologies, and be able to continuously develop new solutions to meet needs that emerges. People lie at the very core of our capabilities, and we have also been able to build up various communities within URA where people share and teach each other how to use data, how to use new digital solutions and tools. And we have very regular touch points with academia and industry to understand what are some of the new ideas, some of the new solutions. And I think this morning is really something we look forward to as well, to have this conversation with everyone on how we see this use of AI going forward. We also have a systematic training programs for all our staff and management to have a good appreciation of how data analytics should be used and have greater familiarity and proficiency in the use of various analytics tools. But to push the frontier, this really requires us to not just do internal experiments, but also work with external partners to develop new science, develop new methods. And we have been doing so with various partners locally and globally. I will highlight some of the local collaborations. We have partnered with academia, for example, with NTU, to look at how do we apply new clustering methods to better understand the agglomeration of economic activities in Singapore. And this is where we want to get better insights on why do these agglomeration patterns occur to inform the way we plan for economic activities going future. We also partnered industry to better understand mobility patterns, bringing together data on private hire trips together with public transport trips, not just to understand the spatial pattern of these mobility activities, but also how do they relate to land use in different time of the day and different locations, which may have different degrees of accessibility. I think the frontier of urban analytics is really very, very wide. And we continue to also engage experts globally. These are just a snapshot of our more recent touch points with various experts in Europe, in Asia, and also in Singapore. And this is a continuous conversation that we're interested to have, both in being able to learn from the world, but also to contribute to the larger practice and the efforts to drive this innovation. Most recently, we also partnered with industry to look at how can we bring the experience and the ideas, the solutions that we have put in place or used to cities around the world. It is probably and very likely that every city's context is quite different, and then there will be quite a lot of adaptation that will be required. But nonetheless, I think being able to partner the industry to bring solutions that's test-bedded in Singapore globally is something that we are very interested to work on. So I mentioned Alvin and I are from the Digital Planning Lab in URA, and we focus greatly on how do we incubate new ideas, build capabilities. How do we accelerate the way we get useful insights and transform the way we plan in Singapore, and also perhaps contribute to the larger community? At the same time, inspire and drive innovation, both within the public sector and also together with industry. And one of these areas that we have been exploring is how AI can be useful in the way we work. I think we are still quite early in the use of AI, but some of the areas that we have applied include how do we apply it in guiding our enforcement work, how do we make better sense of public queries, how do we provide information services in a more intuitive, easy to use and efficient manner. But certainly, I think there are many other areas where we see the potential for AI, and we are interested to develop solutions and better understanding of how we apply them in the urban planning domain. We envision in the future where the entire planning cycle has a greater element of AI, where this will supplement our effort to improve our data quality, to redesigning our system, and building up our people's capabilities to achieve not just a more automated process, but having a suite of intelligent decision support systems that work alongside, work together with our planners in delivering better outcomes for our people and for the economy. Looking at how AI technology is emerging and maturing across many sectors of the industry, today with AI systems that are very capable in dealing with complex games, and with AI systems that are able to do reasoning and debate with individuals, with systems that are able to are empathic and are able to suss out what could be the personalities and concerns that individuals have. We think that the future is very promising. And the areas we see connection with urban planning include how do we have explainable recommendation engines to help us identify suitable sites for different needs? How do we have multi-objective land use optimization models that help us look at future options and what are some of the trade-offs, not just for the present, but also in different time steps into the future? And also, how can we have perhaps conversation engines that can support our own planners in thinking through, in rationalizing, in evaluating the different proposals that we receive? We do recognize, of course, that there are certain underlying enabling technologies that are also required, whether it's in terms of intent mapping for urban planning issues or the ontology of information relating to urban planning context. And we see this as probably a holistic set of areas. One of our ideas is really working towards an AI smart planning assistant. This is not one mega system, but a suite of solutions that can allow us to make sense better of what are the local characteristics, what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and challenges for different districts, towns, neighborhoods, better anticipate how needs will evolve in the coming years, and by when we may need to act and ensure that a new provision of capacities is in place, be able to, as I mentioned, recommend where are the areas we should be focusing on so that we can be much more precise and also optimal in where we put new infrastructure and new investments. But at the same time, there are trade-offs that are often involved. In placing certain things in certain locations, it may mean that we are closing other options, or that we may have to make changes from what was perhaps the original intent and original plans. And so being able to look at scenarios where we are able to measure these performance and options much better allows us to better anticipate and consider these things more holistically. As we enter the implementation stage, a better way to make sense of what are the state and the status of different infrastructure implementation, what are some of the implications when certain projects are delayed or affected. When we are evaluating proposals or applications, how do we find very efficiently what are some of the most related and relevant past cases that we may use to reference or for benchmarking? And in processing the application, how do we more efficiently make sense of whether it complies with the current regulations and guidelines, and are we able to also very quickly make certain recommendations on what perhaps are some of the adjustments that may be needed, either to meet the compliance or to reduce the nuisances that some of the activities may have on the adjacent areas and neighbors. Moving to the maintenance stage, we want to have a better way to continuously understand how the way spaces and infrastructure, how they are being used, are changing with time. And certainly, as many things are changing much more rapidly, this becomes an important aspect for us to be much more responsive in how do we then review and adjust our policies, regulations, and guidelines. And in situations where certain activities may present a nuisance or a certain negative impact on its neighbors, how do we identify some of these more easily and allow interventions to be done in a more timely manner? As I mentioned earlier, there have been some areas that we have been working on, but going forward, we are open to ideas on how can we harness the use of technology, data, to help us in these various areas. We're open to collaboration with industry to develop, to test bed, and to scale and or deploy these solutions in our day-to-day work. We are also open for possibilities of services that we could tap on that helps us to have some of these better understanding on the issues that we want to incorporate into the planning decision itself. So I hope what I've shared in the last 10 odd minutes, 20 minutes gives everyone a sort of a overview of some of the outlook that we see, how we've evolved in the use of data analytics, where we think there is potential for AI in the planning system going forward. And I look forward to the panel discussion after this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chong-Wen. Thanks for that presentation, and you know, I took away quite a bit from what you've shared, and realized that actually the process itself is more complex from the days when I was studying geography and understanding, you know, how urban planning works. And I think this is a good chance, a good time for us to bring in the rest of the panelists and kind of share kind of like what their thoughts around this are. So maybe just let me bring in, just make sure that I have everyone's names here. Okay. So when I first saw the topic of imagining the cities of the future, you know, the first thought I had was a very futuristic thought. I think if everyone just step back and took a 5-second pause to think about imagining the cities of the future, just by the word imagining itself, you know, somehow, you know, the image of Blade Runner and the image of, like, you know, futuristic science fiction, you know, horizons, you know, of tall buildings and dark skies come to mind, right? And I think that's an interesting end goal, or an interesting goal to achieve too. But I think the process itself is a bit more complex. So what we don't see, you know, are the guts of how these cities have evolved. And a lot of times when we look at a lot of the dystopian, you know, future projections of what a city of the future looks like, it mixes a bit of the cool and also the not so cool, right? And I think today's conversation will be super fun to kind of like understand from the panelists, you know, how this process is put in place, you know, and how is it, how do people actually come to these final decisions, right? And can we actually envision, you know, a future like what we see in science fiction? So maybe let me introduce some of the panelists that we have here today. We have with us Dr. Alvin Chua, who is the Executive Data Scientist of the Digital Planning Lab at the URA. We have Pras Ganesh, who is the Program Director at the Toyota Mobility Foundation, and who is also the Project Executive Vice President for Corporate Planning in the Fleet and Business Solutions and the Regional External and Public Affairs at Toyota Daihatsu Engineering and Manufacturing. We have Peter Chai, who is the Head of Applied Data Science at Sabana Jurong. And we have Myrna Bidner, who's the CEO and co-founder of Run With It Synthetics. And we have with us Gopal Varutaraju, who's the Regional Director at Prowler.io. So maybe I can get everyone to maybe share 30 seconds, on some of the things that they're doing, and some of the things they're interested in. Let's start with Alvin.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Well, someone has broadly described what the lab does. So specifically, I work with a team of data scientists, data engineers, and we do most of the heavy lifting to support the studies that you've seen. Besides that, I also work with Panelist in URA to chart the R&D plans today and looking into the future. So projects that that we hint at, these are sort of planned together with business users. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Alvin. Pras, can we get a... Oh, I think you're still on mute. Yeah. Oh, Pras, we're still not getting your audio. Okay, maybe while Pras is getting the... here we go. Yes. Oh, it went off again, sorry. Pras, we still can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. When we talk about cities in the future and I can't get my mic working, it's a bit kind of worrying. But actually, anyway, thank you. It's a pleasure to actually be here. As mentioned, I run the Toyota Mobility Foundation. Our kind of banner is about trying to get more people to go more places. So it's more really about mobility, whether with moving people or even without moving people. But how do we ensure that mobility can provide opportunities to people? And we fundamentally look at two kind of areas. One is mobility, harmony in mobility, another one personal mobility. So what we're kind of trying to do, simplistically speaking, is solving problems caused by too much mobility. For example, pollution, traffic congestion, accidents, these kind of things, or too little mobility, where you have for aging populations or people who are underserved or these kind of areas as well. So we try to find solutions for this, and we have projects that are global. Most of our projects in Asia are fundamentally looking at especially decongestion. And anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Pras. Can we get Myrna to share a little bit about herself?
Sure. I'm a CEO and co-founder of Run With It Synthetics, and here joining you from Canada. And what we do is create synthetic models. So synthetic models of cities, complete with their people, their policies, their infrastructure, their technology, their climate. And really the reason that we have set out on this adventure is because the complexity of all of these interconnected systems and the necessity of putting humans and making those systems, processes, and infrastructure very human-centric. So designing better outcomes is our mission. And we look at the world really quite holistically, and we're about tackling things that are more complex than maybe humans can imagine.
Thank you, Myrna. Peter, can we get you to intro next?
Hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Peter. I head the data science team in Savannah, Jurong. Savannah, Jurong is one of the largest Asia-based urban and infrastructure consulting firm. Our service covers the entire built environment value chain, from master planning, township planning, smart city consulting, to facility management and security service. And my role, I have a team of data scientists, and we provide data solutions to both public and private sectors. One of the biggest projects that we worked on is in Singapore public housing. So in Singapore, over 80% of our population stays in public housing, and we monitor the operational health of the 26,000 lives in this public housing. We also look through millions of residents that stays in this public housing, and through the feedback, the complaints, and the suggestions that they provide every year. Yeah, happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Peter. And then we have Gopal, who's the regional director at Prowler.
Thanks, Victor. Thanks for having me in this event as well. So I represent Prowler. It's a machine learning company based out of Cambridge, UK. And it's very interesting when Zongwen was mentioning about, the AI and the spectrum of AI, because there's, in AI, there's quite a lot of spectrums, robotics, expert systems. So we do machine learning, but deep learning. So it has the ability to do supervised learning and unsupervised learning, to generate outputs that, sometimes you understand what the output is, but in some cases, the machine learning can also, based on the data, give you information that you're not aware of, and then you take policies according to it. So some of the things I can relate to is like power grid, and how you can actually manage power grid in a smart city and do dynamic pricing on it, on top of it as well. In certain locations where there's industrial use, there's got to be more usage. So Prowler actually does AI-based machine learning to do explainable, as well as to do decision-making, which is trade-off. I think some of the words Zhongwen used was, related very well to what Prowler does in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopal. So, and then maybe I'll do a quick intro on the work that we are doing here at SGInnovate. So I head up in our direct investments team, and I think the reason why we are interested in this space is because we invest in a lot of the core technologies that help to enable the smart cities of the future, right? So we look at everything from AI, we look at mobility quite aggressively, investing in hardware and software. We look at healthcare as in terms of devices, therapeutics. We're also looking at Industry 4.0, right? And how that looks. What that looks like in the future. So everything, from trying to automate factories to, to automating, daily lives. So from doors, to doors to gates. And of course, we are also trying to understand how to piece all these things together in a much larger vision. So a lot of our investments are made in Singapore and overseas, and happy to be here to learn from everyone, as to how we can help to integrate a lot of this core technology into our daily lives. So let's start. Let's go to the questions. Before I begin, maybe I'll let the audience. So now we have about 310 people. Welcome everyone from all over the world. So I think we want to let you know that there will be a Q&A at the end of this discussion. Please post your questions in the Q&A. We'll try to cover as many relevant ones as possible. So please type the questions there. The questions in the main chat will be hard for us to get to. So please type the questions in the Q&A. Okay, let's begin. Okay, so maybe just to get everyone on the same page, right? And trying to set a context. Maybe if everyone in the panel can share with us your idea of what the city of the future is like in your minds, and what are some of the key features that differentiate it from a city of today and a city of the past? Is it really that different? So maybe let's see. Okay, we'll let the lady start first. Mona, you get the honor of starting the discussion.
I think for me, the city of the future is very connected and very holistic in terms of how it's been planned. It's really inclusive as well, and addresses the needs of all of its citizens. I think that there is this idea of digitalization and decentralization that is going on, and I think that plays a really kind of fundamental role. I don't think that it's necessarily incredibly technology saturated. I think there is a really kind of efficient and important role for technology to play in how we deal with people and patterns of life. And so I think that to me is one of the key things, is that we really continue to stay human-centric, look for the really essential, kind of aspects of where technology needs to be applied to achieve the goals, the overarching goals of a better city.
Okay. Maybe next I'll get Pras to share with us some of your thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me this time?
Yes, perfect.
Appreciate it. So actually, talking about the cities of the future, I'm a bit of a realist insofar as saying, potentially, if we look at currently about 50% of the population lives in urban cities. And as we continue to go, maybe by 2050, we should be around 70%. So that's almost 7 billion people potentially who are going to be in these urban cities. So I think there are two kinds of cities that we need to consider. The first are brownfield cities, like existing cities where populations actually grow into them. These cities are always will have to play catch up, where the growth of the city and city planning is always kind of mismatched a bit. Certain areas get better in time with technology and with speed, and certain areas don't, just by virtue of the fact that we're going to be able to, with the population, actually, you'll always have some issues. But you will also see a lot of greenfield cities where the planning kind of predates what can be done. There is some element of prescription, so it's always going to be an issue really about technology versus some freedoms. There's always going to be a bit of this kind of trade-off as well. So I think this is maybe the kind of cities that I do see. In some ways, it's like security as well. So trade-off, but you do see efficiency kind of improve in area by area, greenfield versus brownfield. That's how I see it.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I put a dampener on some.
No. I think it's good that we do explore the spectrum, right? I mean, this is life, right? There's a spectrum of views, and all of us represent something a bit different. At this point, at this point, we're just trying to get everyone's anchors, so we understand where you're coming from. And which is why it'll be fun to have the discussion, right? Peter, maybe you could share with us some of your thoughts around this also.
Well, I am more idealistic. So in my mind, the city of the future is more data-driven. In order to achieve data-drivenness, if that's a word, we need data democracy. So I imagine people having access to data. So you make your decisions daily, what time to wake up, where to park your car, which way is the shortest way right now to the nearest bus stop so that you can get to the office. Everything is data-driven. So that's my ideal city of the future.
Thank you. And Gopal, maybe you can weigh in on some of your views.
Yeah, I mean, what Peter said, I have to leverage on. I think it's going to be very technology driven, and AI has got a lot of possibilities in the smart city. Looking at what Pras said, right? One important thing to note is you just can't apply technology because brownfield, greenfield has got different challenges. So when you're in a greenfield, you have a lot more opportunities to do proper urban planning, and then you embed AI into it. Well, in more mature estates and all, then I think it's going to be brownfield approach, and data is, I think we have a lot of data, but whether we have a proper approach to organizing the data to address some problems. It could be traffic issues, it could be power grid issues and stuff like that. So I think Zhongwen's problem will be quite a bit, because I can see that planning part of it would require a lot of sub-master plans, and then how you bring in different kind of technologies, be it expert system, robotics and all. Yeah, so that's my view of how the execution going towards a smart city.
Thank you. Okay, and I deliberately left Alvin and Zhongwen to the end to kind of just to see from a master planner point of view what they think. So maybe Alvin, you wanna start by sharing your views on kind of like what is your idea of the city of the future? Okay, not URA, not Zhongwen. What's yours?
Sure. Well, I think many interesting perspectives were brought up, right? Let's take a time-based perspective this time. So, cities have been centers of commerce and social activity, right? How were cities? How did cities grow? What kind of how did that growth happen, right? So previously, infrastructure and services were always trying to catch up to the needs of people and businesses. So that's how things happen organically, right? But today, cities plan for growth, right? Why do they plan for growth? Because they want to attract talent and opportunities. And how do they do this? Right? They try to understand the needs. They create optimal conditions for that kind of growth. Right? The city of tomorrow must be able to do this very effectively, right? Because the challenge that we all face today and moving forward into the future is common to everyone, right? There is increasingly tight resources available to us. And we are also constantly under growing public scrutiny, and the expectations from the public are always increasing, right? So the city of tomorrow must be able to draw upon new ideas and technologies to tackle the constraints that I've just mentioned.
Nice, thank you. And finally, Zhongwen, maybe can we get some of your view of what your future city looks like?
I guess to me, what a city doesn't change is firstly, it will, to me, always be a home. And as a home, I think it's important for it to remain and become more endearing. I think a city is often also about hope. Hope where people feel that there's chance for success and chance for new opportunities or encounters. And I sort of feel that on that aspect, perhaps a city of the future should be enchanting. I sort of think, therefore, perhaps looking ahead, there are opportunities, but there are also challenges. And maybe a lot of the things we have to look at is how our daily lives, how the choices we make are more informed. We are able to connect people with data. People are able to make more informed choices. I think we want to also see how we can connect people to people, because a lot of solutions I feel in the future relies in knowing people, knowing ideas, and being able to co-create solutions together. And perhaps as a city, of course, striving to be more efficient, I think it's about how we can connect data to certain actions that can happen and respond in a more efficient way. But I think we hopefully don't lose sight that a city is a home, and it's also should be continuously a beacon of hope.
Thank you. So interesting spectrum of views, right? So we have we have a couple of optimists and idealists here, and we also have the reality, right? And I think everyone's view is grounded in some fact, and I think I like the idea of what Pras brought up, which is the idea of the brownfield and the greenfield, right? In that, sometimes we're just stuck with what we have. So how do we plan and develop a city for that, versus like a pure greenfield? Like Singapore, for example, we don't have many greenfields left. I mean, like maybe that's the way I look at it, right? Singapore is tight, right? And I think we are always looking for ways to look at our brownfield strategy and also innovate on the few greenfields that we have left, right? So the next question, I guess, is kind of like how does everyone look at the process of planning and development, and how has this changed, right? Especially now. I mean, I wouldn't have asked this like 4 months ago, but now, with COVID and what we've learned from it, right? This concept of like, social distancing, how does that throw a spanner in the works, for city planners and urban planners, especially in dense populations? So right now, I don't need everyone to go in sequence because we have your views now. Now we just want to make sure that you guys just have a conversation. So maybe we'll get Zhongwen to start, since you were the last one to speak. How do you think the process itself has changed for development? And especially with COVID, right? How can we expect like new developments in the space? And what are some of the extra thoughts that you have going on in your head, as we approach this?
I sort of see that there are probably 3 elements. First, there are things that we are certain. And what we are certain is things have changed. Be it in daily lives, in the way we work, in the kind of new acceptance of things. I think what is probably generally accepted is things have changed. What is not certain is how much has it changed, and how long will this change remain, and will this change continue to evolve? I think this presents the challenges that as planners we face. We are very clear that definitely quite a lot of the things we had planned for will probably need to be adapted to new changing needs and lifestyles. But how do we do that in a way that is more precise and that it is more targeted? I think that is something we need to continue to work on. But I think, like I said, I think going back to my earlier point on the future of the city, I think some of the underlying values probably has not. And the desire for every city to be livable, to provide a good quality of life, I think that will remain, and continue to provide a vibrant and competitive economy, that will probably also remain. And it's the question is, how do we connect these 3 things then together? Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And Pras, in your work, in covering mobility, how has the planning for that changed as more technology comes along? I mean, like you mentioned that technology centrism that doesn't really get us anywhere, right? But have your methods at looking at such dense populations changed?
No, just to make a clarification, I didn't say that technology is not going to get us anywhere. Technology is going to make an improvement. But
Yes.
at the same time, the degree and the issues that we can solve is just about whether we can solve all of the problems. Because on brownfield cities, there are so many issues. And a lot of them we are able to tackle, and a lot of them we're not, especially in terms of prioritization. So let me maybe first address the issue related to COVID and city planning. And then I'll just talk a bit about mobility planning and how that's also changed currently. So first of all, when we come to COVID, I mean, I know this sounds a bit blasphemous, but in some ways, COVID is a good thing for city planning in a strange way. And the reason I say that is that previously, a lot of city planners have always talked about the fact that currently the city is not particularly well planned, as in work areas are in one particular part of the city, residences are usually in certain areas, schooling is in certain areas. So it's kind of been very spread out. And these things also cause problems, just in terms of, at least if I look at the mobility space. And often when you talk to a lot of city planners, they have spoken about kind of hub and spoke models, or models where you have vertical developments. So when you talk about vertical developments, especially when COVID kind of brought a realization of working from home and far more remote accessibility in terms of a lot of activity, whether it comes to deliveries home, or even in terms of working from home, it comes to education at home. So we will see this kind of a transformation potentially allow cities to be more, in some ways, better planned rather than being extremely spread. So we will see this kind of element probably being triggered by COVID. So that's the reason why I made my comment about it a bit blasphemous. It's not, none of us would have wanted this, but nevertheless, it has actually kind of caused this particular learning. Specifically related to mobility, I mean, very frankly, mobility has always struggled with demand and supply. So how much demand you have, how much supply you have, how do you make it more efficient versus how do you make it more convenient? So when it comes to this, fundamentally data is what actually probably gives us the right kind of insight for us to plan mobility far better. However, the issue is about which data you require for it to be planned appropriately. Just to give you an example, I can think about demand and supply, but when I look at weather patterns, or when I look at an incident that may take place, or whether I can look at behavioral issues, some people driving better versus others, these kind of things can completely throw the model in a different way. So the question is which data we require, how do we integrate it together, and how do we use the right data to plan better versus actually ignoring a lot of the excess data that we will have into this space. So it's a very fascinating area, and we're kind of excited to be working in this space.
Interesting. And tool-wise, has that changed a lot? So in terms of planning for it, are you using different tools? Or is it still? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So I think fundamentally, I mean, a lot of the tools that we are looking at least from mobility planning is really, previously we had some data. We always had some data that allowed us to get, we know where public transport is running. We had map data. But now as we are starting to get more information, for example, we have acceleration and braking data, for example, harsh acceleration, harsh braking. We can have an incident. We can layer it with an event. We have a big concert taking place in a certain area. You can start layering different data to be able to identify the right way of planning for mobility, rather than looking at it in a more simplistic way, where it just says we have demand here in point A and we have supply in point B. So how do we make sure that we can match that? It's never as complex as that. It's never as simple as that. We need to try and understand human behavior. I think Myrna mentioned it about human-centric mobility planning or human-centric planning. I think that's absolutely the key. Every single, maybe just one last point, every single mobility journey also is very different. For example, if I am making a journey myself, I may use a particular form of mobility, but if I'm taking my two kids who are very young, I may use a completely different form of mobility. Or if I'm taking my mother who is elderly, I may use another form of mobility. So you need to understand the purpose of mobility to be able to plan for it appropriately. And this is kind of where maybe in terms of democracy of data, this is one of the areas that kind of become one of the key issues going forward.
Thank you.
I'd like to jump in. In my previous life, I worked at Grab. For those who are not in the region. Grab is like the Uber equivalent in Southeast Asia. So the underlying allocation engine for the allocation of a car or a motorbike in certain countries to a user is actually based on what process just mentioned. It's not simply the number of the nearest available asset. It takes into account the behavior of the driver, the behavior of the user, and then try to optimize the probability of allocation. And in fact, it's not the probability of allocation, it's the successfully completing the ride. So it's actually a lot more, human behavior plays a huge part, more so than demand and supply. Then the other point that I want to touch on about data-driven planning is how at Sabana Jurong, we are trying to work with our domain experts to help to drive towards data-centric design. So in Sabana Jurong, we have a team of Singapore township planners who does a lot of this designing and township planning design for upcoming and refurbishment of the new existing towns in Singapore. And these are referring to the public housing that I mentioned earlier. So one of the key things that we are trying to work with is to see how we can use our existing data sets to adopt a more data-driven approach towards designing the township. So one of the interesting things that we found is, say, for example, everybody likes a waterfront property. But what is it that you're paying for? Do you give up anything when you, besides the extra price that you pay per square foot, right? So one of the interesting things that we found, clawing through, using natural language processing to claw through all the thousands and millions of feedback, is that an apartment within the same precinct that is directly facing the water body faces up to 2 times more insect-related complaints compared to the same, compared to apartments within the same precinct, just like a couple of blocks away. So these are some of the interesting ways that we are trying to explore and push the boundaries of what we can do with our existing data to try and be more data-driven.
And maybe just to close up the question, like from Alvin and Myrna and Gopal's perspectives, are there what are some of the new processes that you've seen or that you're working on in terms of being used to achieve planning for future cities? Maybe Alvin, would you like to? Oh, sorry, Myrna, go ahead, man. Yeah, perfect.
No, I'll hop in. So, one of the things that COVID kind of brought about for us, and I do agree that there are some kind of opportunities as for us to make real kind of advancements and improvements, is a recognition that some of the systems that had been in place, some of the planning, some of the modeling, some of the forecasting really need to be able to adapt. And that this has never kind of been more important, and adapt, based on things that we haven't seen before. So while data plays a huge role, and data-centric efforts and initiatives are really important, we need to recognize that a lot of the things that we want, in terms of a better future, don't have data around them yet. So we haven't, and we're realizing this with COVID, our work with energy grids. So we do a lot of work with utilities. They're recognizing that there is this massive and fundamental shift now in the grid and how energy is used. And that not only creates some risk, for grid suppliers who have had a very centralized, hub and spoke model, but it also shifts then how they respond to emergencies where issues are popping up, people's ideas about, becoming the generators of their own power and power self-sufficiency, and then, creates opportunities to use and engage with new technologies like vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, things like that, where people can, now become their own, producers and consumers of power during daylight hours when they're at home. So, it's all of these kinds of really interesting opportunities to get in front of, what the challenges are and begin to model things that are opportunities that could happen, rather than just relying on data from things that either are happening or have happened.
Thank you, and that's a great segue, into the next part, which is and as we move towards a more like data-driven and consultative planning process, right, for cities, What do all of you think are some of the key challenges? I think I've highlighted a couple of things, around data, right? So like the data itself is the lifeblood of our discussion at this part, and everything around data, including training data, the ownership of data, the privacy and governance of data, right? Would love to hear your thoughts around the key challenges, starting with maybe like around data.
Maybe I can just weigh in here a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of what Pras mentioned, I think the volume of data is going to grow, right? And when we use neural networks now to resolve all these issues, it's managing, but it takes its time consuming as well. I'm talking from a research perspective here. So I think what Prowler is trying to do is Prowler is going into more Gaussian process and stuff like that, where they are also fine tuning the model in terms of research to be able to handle volumes of data and to be able to be explainable with what are the key attributes that affect the outcome. So I think in terms of the data and technology around it, there's a lot of research going around that. And when we come to a breakthrough, I think then we can be able to handle the kind of volume and velocity of data that rush in, right? Because you got this volume, you got variety, and you got velocity, like traffic signals and stuff coming in. So I think in terms of technology and research, there is a lot of room for improvement, but I think that would be a key determinant of resolving really how you want to push the boundaries of a smart city planning.
And what about the perspective of privacy and governance around the data, right? I mean, a lot of this data so beyond what Myrna is doing, which is synthetic data, a lot of our data is actually from live data, live historical data, which typically is aggregated, right? What are your thoughts around how comfortable people will be in terms of their data being used to find better simulations of what would be useful in the future? And how do we have better governance around that?
If maybe I can start. So I think the critical issue really is about, still I think a lot of people love the concept of data, but at the same time don't want to provide their own data. So it's a bit of a NIMBY situation. So as long as you're using someone else's data, it's fine, but don't use my data, everything else is okay. So there's a bit of that. But I think the critical element is really about how the data is being used, and then specifically creating an appropriate framework for data usage. So I think that's really a critical issue, that states should create that framework and some kind of a body which is regulating that in order for the data to be most appropriately utilized, and people feel a bit comfortable that the data is being used essentially for their benefit rather than actually to take advantage of themselves. So I think that's kind of, maybe it's a very simplistic answer. It's a very complex question, but as a simplistic start to the discussion, I think I just wanted to kind of talk about those 2 points.
I mean, like, and in this process, how do we balance between, what larger society requires from a city, right, versus what some people personally believe that they need as conveniences on a daily basis. Right? Is there some kind of balance that we strive towards, and how do like master planners in this sense try to find that balance?
Maybe I'll give some thoughts. I think this question on data privacy, data ownership, it's a very understandable question and understandable perspective. I think several members of the audience have also sort of have similar interests. I don't think there's a perfect solution, but I think what people can agree with is that the data today does allow us to have a much better understanding of what is the pulse of the city. Sometimes I think the pulse of a city, it's a bit like how when we see the doctor takes a pulse, like this, like TCM, and then you try to see whether are there things that need certain intervention. And I think what people would also agree is that people want the kind of services that they get to be better. They want their needs to be better met. And I think I thought what Peter mentioned just now about people being able to make better choices, I think that's also what people generally want. I think that's where data that is increasingly available or sometimes repurposed allow some of these things to be achieved. But of course, I think what also that doesn't go away is really people's concern and respect for individual privacy, not being too invasive, not feeling too creepy. And I think that is something we always need to bear in mind. And I think the way we use data has really been focusing on ensuring that we don't invade into people's privacy. We are not trying to identify people. We're not trying to track and monitor every individual. I think a lot of the data that are being used, whether it's from a transaction point of view or even some of the feedback, they are really used in a more anonymized, a more aggregated manner, where what we are trying to pick up is general trends. I thought Myrna mentioned just now about inclusiveness, and I think one of the feedback we often hear is that when planners are able to use insights from the data that we use, it's actually very inclusive, because the actions and interventions that follows actually benefits people, and no one actually needs to do anything. No one needs to install an app. No one needs to learn how to use a new service. So that barrier to entry is very low. You do nothing and things improve. So it's pretty inclusive in a sense. But I think that the issue of how do we then govern the use probably requires a multi-pronged approach. And I think in Singapore we have been taking a very multi-pronged approach, whether it's through legislation, through regulations, through controls. But I think it will continue to evolve. And I think with AI, I also think that there are probably other aspects to it, whether it's in terms of understanding enough on the limitations of the solutions, having an appreciation of the biases that may present because of the choice of data or the algorithms, but also some of the ethics of how we look at these things. And I think there are many of these healthy conversations ongoing that will help us.
So I'm sorry, but we're a little stretched on time. So I'm going to power through the couple of last few questions that we have, and then we'll go to the Q&A. Panelists, are you guys okay to have a slight extension? Thank you very much. So maybe I'll just move on to sustainability, right? And I think that's a very hot topic today and the past couple of years. In terms of reaching a new level of importance, awareness. How has the new practices and methods of city planning affected the various issues around sustainability into the process, right? And that includes everything from biodiversity, all the way to power grid management, in terms of having more sustainable buildings, right? And power use. I would love to hear some of the thoughts from the panel. Let's see.
I can weigh in.
Okay, Alvin.
I've been in and out. My connection is unstable. Well, from a technology perspective, and looking at how plans are made, right? And earlier on, Zhongwen described, I think, on framework, plan formulation, implementation, and maintenance. So my perspective on the various aspects, right? So if we talk about plan formulation, I think what we want is not to just accurately match supply and demand, which many people here have raised, but also we want the plans to be more robust, right? And we want to be able to consider a wider range of potential scenarios before they are implemented, so that the resources are better spent when they are implemented downstream. Now, at the stage of implementation, when we are considering different potential configurations of implementation, we want the assessments to be more holistic, and we want to preempt potential challenges, right? When we look at maintenance, we want to be more preemptive. We want to proactively identify issues that may occur before they occur and address them. So predictive enforcement, predictive maintenance, all of these, they point towards being more prudent with the way we resource our operations. So that's a perspective on how the technology can potentially change the way we operate.
Thank you. Any other thoughts around this? Not 3, 2, 1. I'll go to the next one. Which are the countries that you believe are on the forefront, of this work around figuring out new methods and new ways of planning for the future city, and also on its deployment, right? And are there, city scale test beds or living labs where we can actually test some of these new processes and outcomes? I mean, ideally, when we have something so big, we don't want to just put it straight into deployment. So in your knowledge, are there places where governments can work with private companies, startups, and enterprises to find a good mix of this?
Maybe if I can start.
Yes,
So
Pras.
I think, well, naturally, usually when we talk about Asia, Singapore is always seen as the benchmark, very frankly. So when we talk about cities where there is a willingness to talk about technology and trialing the technology, what's being done by NUS, NTA, all of that is pretty amazing, at least as far as I'm concerned, and what we've seen. But taking this opportunity also, maybe I would like to talk a bit about Twitter Mobility Foundation. We've started a project in Kuala Lumpur, actually, called CATCH, which is City Architecture for Tomorrow Challenge. So it's a challenge where the city has provided us with public data, and we've got private data as well, including from players like Grab and these kind of players. And we put all of this data available and put it into a data lake and allow anyone to be able to access that to plan for the cities of the future. So this is exactly maybe an opportunity for even people who are on this call or otherwise to trial out maybe solutions in terms of how data can be used to design a city better. So it is one of the cities that actually is opening up. And I'm using Kuala Lumpur a bit as an example, obviously also to talk about our program, but also as an example that what we've seen, whether it's even in Malaysia, in of course Singapore, in Thailand, in India, we're seeing many cities that are starting to be more and more open to trial at least parts of the city or certain areas for this kind of data-driven city planning. So I think the critical issue, I don't think cities now are very resistant to the ideas, or at least mayors are far more open sometimes than national governments. So if we do speak to a lot of mayors, we do see this kind of openness. We've seen it with C40 or with other players as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunity right now in this particular space.
And I think definitely, Pras, to add on to your point, you know, there's more than just one living lab or test bed that we need, right? Because Singapore itself is not reflective of the conditions of a lot of countries, and I think with a diversity of such labs are required. Do the rest of the panelists have any ideas on in terms of like where are the other city scale kind of like test beds, and how do people get involved, right? How do corporates, how do companies start to work with these governments or cities?
I've just sorry.
Oh,
go ahead, Gopal.
Oh, okay. I think Gopal
no.
unmuted first, so I'm gonna let him go first.
Okay. I actually have come across an article in Toronto. I think it was an initiative started by an alphabet company called Sidewalk in 2019. And they had some initial findings around mobility, building housing, and sustainability. So I do not have the full details, but I think they had started something last year on Smart City Toronto. Yeah, just thought I'd just share that.
Sidewalk Labs was canceled.
Yeah, it's canceled.
Yeah, Sidewalk Labs was canceled, but that's one of the things that we are doing is creating the living lab synthetically of cities. Okay. So that's another alternative before you actually go to a physical lab. Is to be able to model synthetically with the infrastructure and under different conditions, and we're already modeling post-COVID.
Interesting. Thank you, Myrna.
Yeah.
And I guess everyone knows that Singapore also has its own living labs, and Chung Wen has shared in his presentation. You know, so I think the URA will be happy to figure out how they can work with companies and folks who are interested. And Gopal, just to go back on the Toronto project, I think yesterday I think there were a lot of articles around this, right, in terms of how the project itself had been shut down. I think around it was they were met with civil protests. So Iklim actually has a question on the Q&A, which kind of shared that, right, that the project was met with civil protests as the residents there were fearful of the invasion of privacy of residents. You know, and yeah. So I think this relates back to our privacy question, right, in terms of like how can we find a balance between taking the data that we need, but yet, you know, trying to minimize surveillance intrusion onto the residents that we have in countries. So that was a very sad result to that project. So maybe I'll go on to our last two questions, and then we can go on to Q&As. Is Singapore on the path to becoming a city of the future? You know, and in your various jurisdictions, right? Have you seen that? Is there really a path towards being, you know, like future ready, or like, you know, future planning ready?
I'll give my perspective. Right?
Okay, Alvin.
Yeah, I gave it some thought. So I find that if we look at planning technology, the methods that are in practice today, and what we are looking to achieve tomorrow, these follow a natural development trajectory. Right? So if you look at the 50s, we've got quantitative methods that have been core to planning analytics. These are essentially borrowing from statistics and simulations. In the 90s, we started to build tools, right, to systematize and scale these methods to a large number of planners who would do this more frequently. Today, we have large computational capabilities, capacities to crunch big data and to find insights from big data, right? This big data comes from sensors that we instrument all over the city. But tomorrow, what we're looking at is to tap AI capabilities, right? And this will, I think, profoundly and fundamentally change the way we formally implement plans. I think particularly in the areas of multi-criteria search and optimization, as well as natural language understanding, these are key enabling technologies that we will need to look at. But of course, we don't have all the answers. And this is why I think we need to have more sustained engagement with the ecosystem to better map out, right, a development trajectory.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the questions because I think our time is really super short. To end off on just the panel, maybe share one thing that you're really super excited about as you imagine your city of the future, and or one thing that you would like the audience to think about as we get them to be a part of this process. I'll start with Zhongwen. Okay, tell you what, let's keep this to the end. I'm gonna go on to some of the Q&A questions, right? I'll let you guys think about that. Okay, we have about 41 questions. Some of them have repeated in a way in terms of themes. So I think I'll just start with the key issue around privacy. Right? I think there are many questions here that have a similar grounding, which is that of how do we find that unique balance, of getting data, but yet not being in a way where we are and not having citizens worry about being surveilled on. I think that's always the biggest issue. As much as we try to say, hey, no, we're not surveilling you, we're aggregating data, but people are still worried. So in your experiences, how can we find that kind of balance?
Maybe I'll just chip in from a technology perspective. There's no such thing as a 100% secure system in the world, right? So I think we must understand that. And what companies, a lot of the hyperscalers are doing today, because of healthcare issues and data privacy, so there are solutions out there to mask data, right? There are technologies. It's just an expensive technology to overlay on top of data that is exchanged. So hyperscalers are putting a lot of money in terms of securing data. If it's a technology solution, right? It's not a philosophical part of it, because if there's a breach, what happens and stuff like that. So I think we are not 100% there, and there's got to be a two-way approach to handling privacies. So if it's a technology discussion, then there are technologies that can allow to mask information and data, so that you can go about doing your AI stuff or your your AI stuff on your data and stuff like that.
Yeah. From a communication perspective, right? How do you believe that we can alleviate the worries that people have around a more surveilled, whether it's surveillance is an increase in data correlated to an increase in being surveilled, right? I think that's the biggest concern, especially when it comes to city data.
Can I take the question?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, I'll just address this very quickly. I think it is important that any kind of studies that harness data make known its value to the people that it's supposed to benefit, right? And I think a big part of it is in communicating how that information is managed from the point that it is collected, transformed, analyzed, and then connected to planning decisions that are implemented. So I think the entire process is important, and we need to do better at communicating this. So be it planning for infrastructure, be it developing a new service that public can consume digitally, I think the most important thing is we must show the data, how the data moves at every step.
Thank you. Peter, you had something you wanted to share?
Actually, it's kind of leveraging on what Alvin has said, but mine centers around more the business model. I think the corporates can play a part in this. I think if we think about, we have to move away from thinking that data is free, and how does data benefit the individual, and what are you giving up in exchange for the information? Say Google Maps, right? Everyone knows that most people use Google Maps, and I'm not sure whether they understand the implication, but in exchange for losing the privacy of having Google track you, you get access to a well planned out map. So I think the business model behind this, the collection of data is extremely important, and that's where I think corporates can come into play.
And maybe I'll go on to a different question. Another one that I keep seeing on the list is around AI, right? And how this concept of AI is actually helping to augment or help to make decisions, for the cities of the future. So maybe can I get a sense of what you believe is AI's role in the planning of the future? As something that augments the process, or as something that actually helps to deploy and make the process more convenient.
I think AI is, I think AI is going to augment the process. I think it's going to facilitate us to extend forward and examine really carefully and intelligently very complex decisions that we are trying to make. I think there is a lot of, and even validate AI tools that we're trying to, mesh together, and sensors and devices and systems. I think, that the amount of kind of energy that people are pouring into, really quite discrete AI solutions, you're going to have to need some kind of overarching, goal, and then augment it with something that can play that future forward, so that you can really get a sense of the choices that you're making and decision support.
And maybe related to that, one of the questions is, how do we measure the success, right? What are the key indicators or indexes that we use to of harnessing data and AI in the design and planning of our cities? How do we know when something is successful? And is it based on a spectrum, on a timeline, or do we have a definite goal of, okay, I think this is it. I think this is a success. Some views?
Maybe sharing something from the private sector. I used to do a lot of work for the oil and gas companies, and they do a lot of AI work with preventive maintenance. So they have IoT sensors to equipments. Turbines are very expensive. So what they do is they actually have the IoT sensors to look at certain temperatures, vibration, and so forth. And then they use machine learning to actually read the data and have a kind of a probability to understand the risk. So, and I'm actually talking about a real use case here, because I think one of the questions was posted there, though it was in a private sector. So it's going to be pervasive the moment you have, and the value that you generate from there is that you have lower maintenance costs, lower even labor costs, because what happens is you have a very proactive approach to solving maintenance, where in the old days, what they do is they do time clock. It's a certain hours, the machine goes down. So, the whole process changes. So the business value is very clear. So I think a lot of companies would follow suit in that same magnitude. Public sector would probably have to do the same thing in terms of business value, right?
And Zhongwen, you want to say something?
I think this issue of how do we measure the benefits, it's a very real, tangible question for any organization, because whether it's the data, like what Peter mentioned, it's not cost-free. The systems are not cost-free. Running these algorithms are also not cost-free. But nonetheless, I think that there are probably two types of ways of looking at the benefits. I think there are the more direct ones, whether it's in terms of efficiency gains, and in the process today, I think planning is I think hopefully I shared the very multifaceted aspects of what planners need to look at. It can be quite complex sometimes, and there are many facets of things that needs to be considered. I mean, that requires a lot of effort to assemble information, to find information, which today I think the process is actually highly laborious and highly cumbersome. I think certainly in being able to have solutions that allows us to search, be able to find, connect, and organize information a lot better will make the process a lot more efficient. And efficiency in being able to assemble information means that the kind of evaluations that planners are able to go through can also be more holistic and robust. I think that's sort of where there's a strong connection between efficiency and the quality of the decisions. There's probably another aspect of it, which is a bit less direct, but it's where if the decision on how we put services, it increases and improves the convenience, it better matches the personal needs of different communities, I think the daily quality of life would improve as well. You find that it's easier to get what you want. So since Peter mentioned about Grab, I find that over the last couple of years, today to get a cab, you want to get from place to place, it's very convenient. You no longer stand on this road to wait for the cab and to hail, and sometimes you wait forever. Now you are able to find a service, a driver, a car very quickly, and I think things have changed. So probably, I do think that there are two aspects of things.
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of other questions. But I think we are severely over time. And I apologize for that, for dragging the conversation a bit longer. So maybe we'll end off today's. Thank you everyone for your questions. We hope to get another forum to actually be able to answer those questions. So maybe before we end off, maybe just in one sentence, share with us, on the panel's view, what you're really excited about, in your journey towards imagining a city of the future. Let's start with Zhongwen.
I think the conversation today is very exciting. It's a new start for us as well in embarking on this journey. I think probably one key thing we are very excited to look forward to is, I think, thinking about AI of the future. It involves both how people work with machines and probably also new ways of how people work with each other. And I look forward to that.
Thank you. Myrna?
For me, it's all of the surprises. So I think that there are many to come, and and I think being able to imagine how we can face and adapt and take advantage of some of the opportunities in those surprises are what I'm looking forward to.
Thank you, Myrna. Gopal?
I would say all the possibilities that AI is going to bring to the table is going to be phenomenal. The next 5 to 10, 15 years.
Thank you. Peter?
I'd like to go one level down. So to me, what excites me in the future is the ability to merge multiple data from multiple sources and then see the possibilities and opportunities. So I think that excites me a lot.
Thank you, Peter. Pras?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, maybe if I could put it in one word, it gives us a chance. Very frankly, before, I think a lot of city planning was based on a hope and a whim, and we hoped that it was best for the city. But now we actually have data which allows us to have a realistic chance to prioritize and speed up what we need to do. So it's a fantastic opportunity, and we should kind of work on it. It has its own risks, but we're not questioning the direction it needs to take. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Pras. And Alvin?
Hi, I think we're looking at potential breakthrough in a new area of applying technology to how cities function, how to better manage cities. And I think it's also very important that this is not done by a single party, but rather co-created by the larger ecosystem. So I think take this opportunity to invite any parties with ideas to come into a conversation with us. You can write to myself or Zhongwen, and I will be very happy to meet with you.
Thank you, Alvin. So I need to thank the panel again one more time, for being here. We should be all really proud. Okay, I'm not proud because I dragged you guys for half an hour, but we are really proud that we managed to keep 2/3 of our people all the way till the end. So there is a lot of interest. If you look at the questions, there is a lot of concern and a lot of people who want to get involved in terms of understanding, how city planning is impacted by COVID, by all these new arrangements, right? So I think we're at an exciting time. And I think you guys have a lot of work ahead of you, and I'm glad that that you are the ones that are involved in this process. Thank you again. We would love to engage you guys further in the future session, and have a great week ahead. So thank you. Right. I think I'll leave you guys to stay on to take a photo with Wei Min. There you go.
Yep. So once again, thank you everyone for sharing your great insights for this session. Also thank all the attendees for joining us. Do keep a lookout for the end event mail they'll be sending for the link of the session, as well as the materials that Zhongwen has shared with us for this event. So just a quick photo to commemorate this session. We'd like to have every one of you to just do a quick wave to the camera. Yep, let's do a quick wave to the camera. And one more time. And yes, that's it. Yep. So once again, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thanks everyone thanks everyone in the audience. And I hope to meet you guys in person, in real life, face to face soon.
Likewise.